All right, so we're going to look at chapter 23 here, the emergence of industrial society in the West. This is called the Age of Revolution, and what we see is even before industrial revolution happens, there's already the rumblings of political and social revolution. So there's a lot of things that are changing. Our essential question this time is what were the forces that led to political and social revolutions? So we see it starts in political revolutions, it starts with American Revolution and then the French Revolution. We're going to talk more about the Enlightenment, but what you should look up and know about are the Enlightenment thinkers. There's Enlightenment ideas, like I talked about John Locke in class. He's one of the first, but then there's several other names, and we'll investigate some in class as we go. They're challenging the way things are going. Why does the king get to have power? Why is the government operating this way? And so they start coming up with ideas using their reason to try to solve problems. Something else, what your chapter points out is that there's population increase, and whenever you have more people, that's more mouths to feed, and it's also more people to try to keep happy. So in power, the people that are in power want to keep it, so they start kind of tightening their grip. But what this also means is that we have an economic change because we have to produce more goods. There has to be more clothing, more food, more consumer goods. So these changes are already working before the American Revolution. We already know about the American Revolution. Make sure you read and take some notes on it. Pause the video as you need. How Britain is limiting and oppressing the colonists more and more, and the colonists don't like it, so they write the Declaration of Independence, which is basically like a big breakup letter to King George saying, you know, things just aren't working out between us. You have these things that you're doing, and we want to do these things, so it's better if we just go our own separate way. So don't need to go into the American Revolution. That's something you guys have had a lot of. What you do really need to know about, I mean, obviously know about the American Revolution, that's why we're here. But what you might not know is about the French Revolution. And so they look at the American Revolution and realize the success is there. They take some of the Enlightenment ideas. And middle class are liking the idea of having more political say because they're living in France where there's the king who is absolute. And we'll talk about absolutism at another time. So he calls together a meeting, and he swears this oath. Things are going to be different. Make sure you look up something called the tennis court oath. And this new assembly that is developed, it comes out of this thing called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, which is kind of copies the American Revolution. I'm sorry, the Declaration of Independence. But this is more about saying we all have these basic rights. Well, the king did not satisfactorily uphold his end of the bargain, I guess would be a nice way to say it. There was famine and there was a lot of unrest, so people just basically revolted and they stormed his armory called the Bastille and kicked him out, and then eventually they even ended up killing him, which I'll talk about in a moment. But they start by overthrowing the monarchy. They overthrow the existing order. Then they get into some different phases, and you can see there's a lot for you to know here. They have these radical and authoritarian phases. Remember, authoritarian is strong authority and power. And so there's some backlash. Like, not only do they not like the king, they don't like the upper classes, they don't like the church. So there's these three estates. The third estate is the peasants, the common people. First estate is the government, and the second estate is the priest or the church. So people that are loyal to one or the other end up having basically civil war. Then you have all this unrest because of economic distress. The king is executed because people blame him for all the problems, and he's executed. His wife Marie Antoinette is executed, and then anybody who opposes the revolution or anybody who seems like they're not 100% full force in favor of the revolution come under the become targets of this thing called the Reign of Terror under a guy named Maximilien Robespierre. And they get real radical. They're saying they're proposing radical things that were brand new at the time. Even in the United States, we didn't have universal male suffrage, meaning not everybody could vote. You had to be a white landowner in order to vote. France, they said every male should be able to vote. They made a metric system. They completely remade the calendar. They made all kinds of radical stuff, big changes that completely shook society. But even the radicals came under fire, and Maximilien Robespierre himself. I mean, there was something like 18,000 people that were executed at the guillotine, and Maximilien Robespierre, the guy who was sending them to the guillotine, himself was beheaded because he was viewed as like being a traitor to the revolution. So then we see, this is always kind of interesting to me, they get rid of a king and replace him with an emperor because Napoleon Bonaparte was an important popular general, and he is basically appointed dictator by the assembly, the convention, and so he embarks on this process, this campaign of conquest. He wants to expand French territory. He manages to do quite a bit, and we'll talk about some of that in class. You'll see the maps, and you'll see how much he's able to accomplish. But then he invades Russia in the winter, and we've seen before when Hitler tried invading Russia in the winter, he failed. Uh, Napoleon provided an example for all the rest of history that people haven't always paid attention to, and that made him very unpopular, and he was exiled. They kicked him out of the country. They made him move to an island. He came back a couple of times, but in the end, they have this settlement where they have this called the Congress of Vienna. After Napoleon's gone, they try to reinstate a lot of the old order. They try to say, okay, you used to be in power, all right, you're back in power. Oh, your grandfather got executed, okay, well you're the next in line, so now you're in power. So they try to suppress, because the French Revolution was sort of like fire. It started spreading throughout Europe, and that, of course, threatened all the people who were in power and had wealth, the aristocrats. And so they try to suppress those tendencies, those ideas. But we see a lot of isms in this chapter and in this section in particular. So you see there's a new ism, liberalism, which is where basically the government should just leave you alone. Individual life is my life, so leave me alone. And I should have representation. I should be able to determine for myself how the government runs. Then you have radicals who want even more beyond what the liberals want. The radicals want like 100% voting rights and property taken and distributed, like all kinds of more extreme ideas than the liberals had. Socialists, which we see especially come along after the Industrial Revolution, they want to have government own the means of production, own the factories, for instance, and set wages and working conditions. And then nationalists, as we've seen before, are stressing national unity. So this is really where we see, as the warm-up questions pointed out, the middle class. We see a rise of a middle class. So we have a whole new social structure kind of coming along, not just because of political revolutions, but also because of the Industrial Revolution. So then we see industrialization starting, and then the revolutions of 1848, and we see that because the industry is changing life, people like farmers, for instance, they start, or I should say, people in the countryside start seeing their lives, their traditional, slower-paced lives, changing, and that creates some uncertainty. And remember, we always want safety, security, and stability. And when we feel like we're unstable, people turn for answers, and so they start pushing their governments for reforms, protections, things like that. And then they have revolts whenever the governments didn't follow through. So make sure you know about the revolutions of 1848. It has some examples here that you can look at. So by the 1850s, there's a new class structure, and we see this is where we have a middle class, industrial middle class, industrial working class. The structure is less about who owns land and more about who has money. And so we see this kind of what we still see today, where there's an upper, a middle, and a low, and it's like all three classes are fighting each other. Then, a very important out of this section in your textbook, political unification of Germany and Italy. Remember, they used to just be kingdoms, and we'll see. Actually, you don't remember that because we haven't covered it yet. They used to just be loosely allied kingdoms or general cultural regions, but now we see that they're unified as a country called Germany and a country called Italy. So it's pretty big. Then this is a social change, adjustments to industrial life. Look and read through this whole thing and make your own notes on how family life changed, how social life changed, how the working class saw. If you're not peasants anymore working sunrise to sunset, now you're working by a clock. So just look at that section there. Then we see, I've already mentioned the new nations. These names here, these people are pretty important. In Britain, in Italy, and in Prussia, there's some big changes, and these men are the ones who led some of those changes. We see there's a lot of political issues that come along that are essentially getting resolved, and we see in this time the American Civil War, states' rights and slavery being abolished. So we see new trends developing where people are, oh crap, stop. All right, I'm gonna have to redo. I'm gonna make another one because this is about to stop me.